Okay.
Can you stand for a second? I'm gonna move your chair.
Those are the marks in the first place. All right, thank you. Welcome to the powerhouse of this conference. Thank you so much for being here. On an August day 100 years ago, a smallish man of 24 with a red rose in his lapel was fleeing for his life to the third-floor ledge of the Tennessee Capitol building. He had just cast the deciding vote to give every American citizen woman in this country the franchise. Now, that red rose in his lapel meant that he had been against this, had been planning to vote against it. The pro-vote wore yellow roses. Yellow was a suffragist color. But that morning, that young man, Harry Byrne, had gotten a note from his mother, Miss Phoebe.
It's a true story.
That note read, "Hurrah and vote for suffrage. I have been watching how you stand." And here she quotes the suffrage leader, Carrie Chapman Catt, "Be a good boy. Put the rat in ratification." His one-syllable "I" changed the course of American history, and the mob chasing him had just lost the battle. But he had followed his mother's advice, and as he later said, "I know that a mother's advice is always safest for her boy to follow." So we have that boy and many, many, many women who fought and battled, in some cases died, for women to get the vote. So you can see the kind of women that we have here on the panel today. Mary Cunningham Agee, at my far left, Harvard business grad, 1979, voted the most likely female graduate to be chair of a company that wasn't a cosmetics company. That was a big deal at the time. And sadly for her and for all of us, she fell victim to one of the first big corporate scandals, the corporate sex scandals that we know, in fact, all too well in this country. She took a job at Bendix, a major auto parts manufacturer, where her advancement was crudely reduced to, quote, sleeping with the boss accusations. She will talk about her blind spots to the culture, the corporate culture, and to the racism going on, because she and her black husband, their marriage suffered by consequence of this. She'll also talk about some of the letters she received from women. I hope you'll quote some of them here today. Because women pay the price. The women who are first at what they do also pay the price. And you know, the changes that our culture have wrought have been incremental changes, and you can go back to that 100-year-old vote. So, and we also have then Barbara Boxer, a member of the House of Representatives for 10 years. 24 years in the Senate, who you just know that the picture in her Wikipedia entry is her in her high heels walking up the steps of the U.S. Capitol to challenge the white male senators who were sitting in judgment of Anita Hill in the hearings over on the other side. And between them, she and Barbara Boxer made California the first state in the union to send 2 women senators to the United States Capitol. Tani Cantil-Sakauye is the 28th Chief Justice of the state of California, nominated to that position by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Her parents were agricultural workers who made sure that their children got educated. She waited tables at one point to pay for her education. And after law school, when she was looking for a job, and she can talk about how hard it is for women to find jobs out of law school, she worked dealing blackjack in Reno. So if you run into her in the bar this evening and she has a deck of cards, why not give it a try? She's also a Brownie leader and the co-chair of the church girls basketball team, and she's also going to be able to talk about women of color and how the double burden that is that they bear. And Anna Quindlen, who began her journalism career at the New York Post. The New York Post, as she knows well, wrote the best headline ever in tabloid journalism, or in any journalism maybe. It was about a mutilation murder in a strip club, and it was headless body in topless bar. So proud. She worked at the New York Times, then a columnist at Newsweek, and the author of several books, including One True Thing, a book about herself and her mother, which was made into a film for which Meryl Streep won the Academy Award. And they should at least give you a little one, don't you think? At least a little chocolate one. It's the least they could do. Anyway, so all of you, thank you for joining us here today. This is a symbolic day, and I want you to talk a little bit about how far you think we've come and where we have yet to go. I think I'll start with Barbara Boxer because she's seen it from the 35,000 feet view as well.
I have. The question is how far we've come since I started. Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when I started, and my husband Stuart is here, we celebrated our 58th anniversary yesterday, so I wanted to give him a shout out because we've been on this journey together, so I'm assuming we should try to speak in 3 minutes. Pat? Okay, I'll go 3 minutes. So to give you a sense of how impossible it was for women, when I started out, I'll tell you a true story. In 1972, there was a big battle for a supervisorial seat up in Marin County, California, where we lived. And Stu and I had been active in the anti-war movement and to a lesser extent for him, but me, in the environmental movement. That was the time that Roe v. Wade was decided, and that was a passion of mine. And so a group comes over to our house and they have to talk to you guys. And they go over to Stu and they say, "We've been thinking long and hard about it, Stu. Will you run for supervisor?" And he said, "Well, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it. Tell me what it pays a year." And Stu's a lawyer, and we had 2 kids at the time, and still do. A lot of grandkids. So they said, he said, "How much does it pay?" They said, $11,000 a year. And he said, honestly, I simply can't afford that. I have to support the family, and I would do it full time, and it just won't work out. And he looks at me and he says, "Barbara, why don't you run?" And I said, "Me?" Just like that. And people say, "Well, that would be interesting." Well, we knew it was a very hard race, so what did they care? They threw me to the winds. I mean, it was against an incumbent. It was a wonderful experience for me and a very tough one. And so I'll tell you what it was like then, and then I'll stop. Letters to the editor. How dare Barbara Boxer run for office? Now, mind you, the incumbent had a full-time job. I didn't. I was raising the kids at the time and being an activist. They said, how dare she run and, ignore her children, who were both in school at the time. And it was a part-time job, 7 minutes from my house. And this is terrible. Then I'd knock on the door. "Who's there?" "Barbara Boxer." Open the door. "I didn't think you'd be so short." I mean, this is absurd. And I said, "Yes, I have been all my life." And she said, "And also, I can't vote for you anyway." And I said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Because you have 4 kids. And you're going to be ignoring them, and I just simply can't do it." I said, "Well, I only have 2 kids." And she said, "No, you don't. You have 4 kids. I know it." And I said, "Lady, have you ever given birth?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "You don't forget it, do you?" I did it twice. But it was a nightmare, and I lost a very close race. And then I dared to do it a second time. And I was ready for the fight. Last point. When I wrote my memoir, The Art of Tough, there's a reason I called it The Art of Tough. Every one of us, including Pat, will tell you what it takes. People, when you are trying to blaze a trail, people don't like to give up power. They don't like to give up influence. They don't like to share it. So they will try to do one thing to you: shut you up and shut you down. And through my whole life, you've watched me. I have never stopped saying how I feel, what I believe, even if it might make some people go, "Oh my God." So it's changing. It's not done. It's definitely changing. It's definitely better. It's still not equal.
And when Dianne Feinstein became a senator, her office let me listen to some of the voicemail that angry men had left. The C word
Oh, yeah.
bitch. And to this day, I know Anna gets that. Anybody in a public space, if they're criticizing you, often the criticism isn't about the substance of what you've done. It's sexual.
That's right.
You know, you ugly bitch, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. You know, nobody would sleep with you. Why do you think you can be raped is a common rape criticism. Oh, yeah, you're not cute enough to get raped. That's not unusual. But let's take this to the idea that the women who do these things first often bear the brunt. They're the guinea pigs of these changes in society and the target very often. So I'll go to Mary about that, because this didn't turn out to be just a job that you took. You were a pioneer. You were front and center, and you paid a price for that too.
It's true that if you're out in front and you're changing the norm, and the norm when I came through Harvard Business School is that it would be a man who'd be graduating from that class. So I felt, even at the business school, the beginnings, the rumbles, when I started to get the job offers that the men wanted, whether it was BCG or any number of other companies that offered me very significant positions. But where it became really difficult is when sexual harassment, which comes in many, many disguises, and it really needs to be noted. Sexual harassment starts with such simple things as idle gossip, but it can go all the way, and it's born of the same mindset. It goes all the way then to sexual assault. It's a full line of possibilities, but it stems from a basic prejudice that a woman does not belong in the position of power. And so everything seemed to be just fine until I started to get the power, started to have the recognition, and that's when the letters started to come. And that's when the gossip started to become hearable. And the next thing I knew, I was on the front page of major newspapers. Boss slaps down off his gossip, denies romantic link. That probably wasn't the most brilliant way he could have handled that question. Denies romantic link opened the door for a discussion of it. While I had a very difficult few months, I want to draw attention to something that I would recommend to any woman who's treated that way, and that is not to give in to victim status. The worst thing you can do is give in to victim status. It's like a poison. It will take your energy away. It will take your confidence away. Be the captain of your own ship. Don't ever give the helm over to someone else. Don't let them convince you of whatever the most negative thing is that they may try to say. Have confidence in who you are, know who you are, set your course. I'm now betraying my New England roots. I love to sail. Take hold of that helm, set the course, go for it, and lean in. And that's what I did after I went through what I did at Bendix. Within 3 months, I, as the New York Times said, landed on my feet with the exact same position, Vice President of Strategic Planning for Seagram's, running their worldwide wine business. I could have talked about it, I could have complained about what had happened, but the single best thing I could do was get the exact same job for another Fortune 100 company and succeed. The day after I was promoted to Executive Vice President of Strategic Planning, I quit. I did what I had to do.
Good.
Amazing.
Mary, talk a little bit about the male corporate culture you encountered. I was astonished reading your book about the things they said to your face. But as Barbara said, people do not yield power. They look at it as a zero-sum proposition.
Yeah.
And you were a threat to that. But the idea that they would say these things right in front of you suggested that this is a virtually impenetrable culture.
It was very impenetrable at the time. And I remember the word they attributed to me was that I was feisty.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, would they ever say that to a man, that he's feisty? But I remember that adjective being applied. And then I developed a certain strength that I don't know that I would have had without the adversity. And I think this is really worth noting, that if you can take all adversity and turn it to your advantage, your adversary is actually your friend. The only way your adversary wins, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, nobody can convince you you're incompetent except yourself. So you just don't allow the rumors, the gossip, the really bizarre adjectives. You just don't take it in. There's a wonderful book that I love that I've read many, many times called The Four Agreements. And one of the middle two agreements are the one that I think are the most important for me. And that is, don't make any assumptions and don't take anything personally. And if you can just live that way, it doesn't matter what environment you're in. You can rise above any adversarial situation. You can actually do a boomerang and make it work to your advantage because it makes you stronger.
Tani, you came from a different culture, working class, and so you had class obstacles, income obstacles to overcome on top of what had to have been sexist obstacles. Can you talk about those?
Thank you. Yes, I would say I agree with all that's been said here. I am the Chief Justice of California. My authorship are cases that we write, about 100 a year, where the legislature and the governor and all civil and criminal defense lawyers read so that they can win their next case. I have to work with 6 other justices who are from Harvard, Yale, and other schools, and together we craft the opinion for the rule of law in California. And this is a rule of law, as you know, that's been dominated and well brought up by male whites. Older male whites, actually. So when I came on the scene in 1984 as a new lawyer, having paid my way through law school, having had to dealt blackjack because I couldn't get a job, my experience was I knew drunk gamblers. So I could pick a jury. I was 23. I had no life experiences. My parents were farm workers. I'm the youngest daughter. I'm an unlikely trial attorney. But what I am, though, is someone who, like you, had a strong mother. And so my civility, my effort at trying to undermine and beat people in trial came from the fact that no one knew I was the lawyer. Everyone assumed I might have been the clerk. And so when you have that, you accept what people perceive as your weaknesses, and you turn them around into strengths, because I'm never not going to look like this. And so as a result, I was able to turn some of those what might have been perceived as weaknesses as strengths. And I'll tell you this, when things are hard, nothing was harder than my mother giving birth in a field. Nothing was harder than that. When I used to fight with Jerry Brown over the budget, he'd say, well, we have to be penurious here. We have to really be cheap. And I said, Governor, you haven't met cheap until you've met my mother. So we are talking together the same language. I've just been able to work on these things that might have been shortcomings because they're not going to go away, and they make us who we are, into strengths and with a sense of humor. And in turn, it makes us and changes how the next person behind us is perceived. So I was blessed because Rose Bird, who was the first Chief Justice of California, started a gender study. This took the legal world by surprise. Gender what? How many women are here? We have to do a gender study? And then after that came an ethnic study. And after that came diversity inclusion and the fact that the California's judiciary draws on the most diverse bar or bench of attorneys that exist in the United States. So we have a judiciary and a legal bar profession that doesn't look like any other state. In fact, up until the last appointment by Governor Schwarzenegger or Governor Brown to our bench at the Supreme Court, we didn't have a white man. And we would talk about ourselves like, well, you have me, we have a Latinx, we have a black woman, we have a white woman. Is there going to be a white guy? And when you look at all of the other states, when I go to the Conference of Chief Justices and we sit in a room, remind you there are only 50 of us, so it's pretty obvious, there is not the kind of diversity. And that diversity is the strength of California. We lead because we are 50% women. We lead because we have majority, minority. We have ideas that come from other cultures. We have food and product that comes from other cultures that makes California a standout. And we have a judiciary and a legislature and an executive branch so diverse that we work together because there are no factions, so to speak. And let me also say, in the addition to this diversity that I like to see now, is the collision of the generations. So many of us judges are boomers, but of course our children are millennials and Gen Zs. And I say this, we see a lot of drama in California, but if you raise 2 teenage daughters, that beats nothing. I'm good with drama. And so I think you see that California leads because of women who've taken the lead. women who lead us, women who write to inspire, women who lead and tell us that we can find our way and we can use what are perceived as weaknesses and turn them into strengths and to laugh about it and to teach and find those other women and men who suffer from that and bring them along and let them know there are no deficiencies, just strengths that waiting to be honed and used in the right moment in the right place.
Okay. Anna, you've been in the middle of this shift. As women become more numerous, that doesn't necessarily, though, translate into power. So talk about some of your experiences and what
Sure.
you've written about.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say a word about language. Mary got feisty, which is a word that is only used for women. I got opinionated, which is a word that's only used for women who have opinions because they shouldn't have opinions in the first place. And if any of you are ever tempted to say of a little girl, she's bossy, don't, because you would never say it about a little boy. I'd like to just take a minute to acknowledge what the chief touched on with Rose Bird, which is the extent to which we stand on the shoulders of our sisters. I would not be sitting here today if it were not for 6 really brave women who in the mid-1970s brought a class action suit against the New York Times, charging that the paper didn't hire, promote, or pay women in parity with men. And as a response to that suit, the Times very quickly hired a whole lot of women at the same time, including a 24-year-old tabloid reporter, me, who was not exactly what they originally had in mind for what used to be called a Times man. And every promotion that I got at an early age, every bump I got up the greasy pole of advancement, I thank those women because they were responsible for so much of my prosperity at the New York Times. I also, every year on her birthday, try to remember to send Gloria Steinem an email that says, "Thank you for my life." Because literally, as a little girl growing up in a really prosperous suburb of Philadelphia, I looked around and realized I had 2 possible career paths: mother of 8 or Roman Catholic nun. Neither of which seemed to me to be an easy fit for my character. And I really feel as though second wave feminism completely changed the world for me in every way that matters. And while, as the senator says, and we miss her terribly in Washington, as the senator says, we haven't come far enough, but boy, have we moved from the time that little girl thought those were her 2 choices. And someone said to me the other day, "What do you think is the biggest change?" And I said, the mindset.
Yeah.
The expectation. I mean, I grew up among people who said, she can't go to college, she'll just get married and waste her education. Or girls don't do that. And there's still a little bit of that, but not very much anymore. And once the mindset changes, the systems that support and sometimes interfere with us begin to change piece by piece. The ice begins to break, and we wind up more prosperous than that little girl could have ever dreamed. When I listened to the chief talk about her court, I just think I could never have imagined a court like that when I was a kid, and now it just thrills me.
So we haven't quite gotten to the point, but we're almost there, where when you see a woman as chief of police, you don't think, oh, you have to say woman chief of police, because it's now routine. The same thing goes with the chief justice of a Supreme Court, or someone performing surgery, in a neurosurgical unit, or maybe somebody occupying the White House in the Oval Office. So the question is, how we talk a lot about humor and standing up to this. At what point shouldn't we have to do this? And this is a Me Too question, because I remember being in the newsroom and there was a lovely old rewrite guy who used to call me a toothsome ginger snap. And I thought, what
I
a
know
charming
those guys.
phrase. Right, you know these guys. They don't mean any offense. That's just the way they were brought up, that this is what a young woman is, and the newsroom is what it is. It's a male bastion. So to what extent do we say, thank God for HR for sticking up for us under circumstances like these, and to what extent do you stand up for yourself and just make an equally dirty joke to show you're one of the guys when you don't want to be one of the guys? You want to change the culture. How do you handle that nuance? Because that's what our kids and our grandkids are coming into.
I don't think that's what our kids and grandkids are coming into, actually. I think that there's a significant difference in the attitude that millennial men have towards the women that they share their lives with compared to men of my generation.
I do too.
And of course there would be a significant difference because they're growing up in a different world than I grew up in. I remember one day sitting with my daughter watching the news I can't remember who was on, but she turned to me and said, "Mommy, has a man ever been Secretary of State?" And I thought, it's a whole new world that she's growing up in. So I think that there will be clear differences that will be determined by a substantial generational shift. I think there'll be differences in gender relations. I think there'll be differences in racial and ethnic relations because they're growing up in a much more polyglot world than we grew up in. And I know that there's a lot out there about the millennials that dings them all the time. I think they're exceptional people who are doing exceptional things out in the world, and they give me hope for the future.
Barbara.
Yeah, I am not quite as optimistic. I do think there's no question change has occurred. But what worries me is, look what's happening from the top. Do you get what I'm saying here, ladies?
Yeah.
And it worries me that all this hard work of the Gloria Steinems and all of us, explaining what it was like. And we were talking before that a lot of the young women don't really get how hard it's been for us. Mm-hmm. And that's, in a way, a little dangerous because it could slip back. But you need to have, as I've always said, and I got this from my friend Barbara Mikulski, who was one of my mentors in the United States Senate and in the House. She said, there are two kinds of guys you're going to run into here, Barbara, she said to me when I came in. That was the year of the woman. The year of the woman.
We only get 1 year, mind you.
We tripled our numbers.
And most of the time we only get 1 month.
We tripled our numbers in the Senate. We went from 2 to 6. That was the year of the woman. And Barbara said, Barbara, you're going to meet two kinds. Guys who are just going to treat you not as equals, and the Sir Galahads, who will go out of their way. And I was fortunate. And I could name a few, but I won't because one of them is running for president, and I don't want to campaign for him. Maybe I will. But this notion that, that it's all going to be good. You didn't say that, but that it is changing, but I am very worried about signals that are coming from the top. And I do think, and I will just close with this, I don't think we talk enough about the past. I don't think we talk enough about the suffragettes. And I was so glad, Pat, that you opened with the suffragettes and the gentleman who made that vote because his mother said, do this. Thank God for that woman. She's the one who's really responsible.
Miss Phoebe.
But imagine, when my mother was born, women did not have the right to vote. And when that right to vote, it's only 1920, which in the scheme of the world and the universe is like 5 minutes ago.
Right.
And so it has been very hard for us and you, women and men who care about us. It has been very hard because it's still pretty new, and I think it's still pretty fragile. And Gloria Steinem, without her, none of this would happen. They were out there. When I lost my first race, the only reason I ran a second time, and that was the only race I lost, I won 11 straight races over 40 years after that, was because Gloria Steinem had written in Ms. Magazine, "Don't give up. Try again. Be strong. Don't let people shut you up and shut you down." So
Okay, I'm
these
gonna
are the
shut you up
women
and shut you
that
down
have
in
made a
a
difference.
Wow, you are
I'll
a
have to
brave
stage
woman.
a walkout. You know, I'm a senator.
I gotta talk to her in
and
the
talk.
green room after.
Talk too much as a senator, sorry.
That's all right.
Got
Mary.
carried away.
Yeah, I think that there's good news and bad news here. I think the good news is that the millennials coming along really do have a much, much better idea of equality, what is fair, not just as it relates to gender, but as it relates to the races, as it relates to any number of topics that matters to everybody here. So I find that very hopeful. And I don't think the guy on the top is going to change that millennial generation's attitudes. They've been raised by women like us. The bad news is that I think this generation of millennials has somewhat forgotten what it really was like to be in that second wave. And there's a danger in that. The danger is the obvious one. I was gathered with Will and my son, who's here right there in the audience. Will. And I asked the question of this gathering of millennials, all highly educated, all very accomplished young people. Do you know what we're celebrating this year? What's the 100th anniversary of? Not a single person knew. And when I went on to say, well, it's the 100th anniversary of the women having the right to vote, do you realize that for the first 150 years of our democracy, half the population couldn't vote? And they looked truly stunned. That's the bad news, in that that can blindside you. If you think you can coast on the shirt tails, the coat tails of what we've experienced, that's dangerous. There'll be some more injuries if we don't get this message across.
Tani, I want to ask you how the laws have changed to help this out. For example, before you could, when you were interviewing a woman, you could ask if she planned to get pregnant and take that into account. You can't now fire somebody who gets pregnant, and you have to keep the job open for when she comes back from maternity leave. All sorts of things that you could do with women that you can't now. Is the law sufficient? Are people ignorant of it and too afraid to use it? Because there's an HR now that you can go to with a problem, but a lot of people think, I'm going to be ostracized, it's not worth it, I'll just put up with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pat. And you and I both know, and all of us here on this panel know, just by watching the Me Too movement, we know that a lot of complaints are 10, 15 years old because people were afraid to come forward regardless of the law that protected them. And laws, let's remember, are only as good as the legislators who make them. And we now have, in the most populous state in the United States, really only 36 women are legislators in California. And the number goes up and down and up and down and mostly down. And so when we rely on decision makers, our legislature, to make these laws, keep in mind that people are afraid to enforce them, exactly as you say, because they think it may hurt their career, it may hurt their chances for advancement. So yes, there are laws. Yes, there are laws that protect for equal protection and equal protection under the law, transgender, cisgender, binary, non-binary, but people are people, and they're afraid to come forward and say, by the way, he squeezed my thigh during the interview. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know that he has a friend in HR. So it's a risk that women and other folks are afraid to take. So we need to empower that. We need to make it, and we need to educate. And we have laws, as you know, we have a recent law by Hannah Beth Jackson, a senator who terms out this year, who requires in California now that women sit on corporate boards. 1 woman on a board by 2020 and 2 by 2021. Right. I'm thinking, are we shooting a little low? Should we be raising the bar here? But I'm not a legislature, and she has to get a number of people to pass that. I mean, she has to get, 40 in the Senate and 80 in the House, in the Assembly to agree? So we're starting out with 1 and 2. I will say this, though, that despite all of our laws, we have a long way to go, because while we can change behavior, we can't change attitude yet. And as we change attitude, then we don't need to necessarily change behavior because it's organic. I will say that I have concern about the future. Not because I know the great strides we have made, but you know what I see today when I'm walking around the store? I see beautiful young women and they're wearing a t-shirt, and the t-shirt says, "The future is female." I want to say, sister, the past is female, the present is female, and when you're promised the future, that means you don't have it yet. So I want you to turn that t-shirt around and stop saying the future is female, because you're hurting us. You're hurting us. The future is female, but it shouldn't be that the future is female. The present should be female. We're talking about 150 years. We're talking about 100th anniversary of our right to vote. I have young women and young daughters in college, and they're in science, and they're still getting mansplained by their teenage colleagues in college. Yeah. So what I think we're raising in the Gen Z and the millennial era are women who are sticking up, women who are saying, I disagree, women who are politely saying no. And that's what we need to continue to nurture, because we can't sit back and think it's going to happen organically. We have a long way to go, and we still need to be vigilant.
I think I need to print up cards that say mansplaining and just hand them out whenever it happens. I want to tee this up for Anna, because you raised the question about attitude. People will still be racist. It's just no longer acceptable to present yourself as that or to act it out. So here I brought along in my research for this, it's a clipping from the New York Mirror from 1960, a man on the street with today's question. Today's question, headline, "If a woman needs it, should she be spanked?" And here's what Ted Gallay, a Brooklyn parking attendant, said, "You bet. It teaches them who's the boss. A lot of women tend to forget this is a man's world, and a lot of men who step down as boss of a family wish they hadn't. Spanking might help them get back some of the respect they lost."
Wow.
Wow is right. So
Now,
attitude.
see, that was a short, 60 years ago, 50
Yeah,
years
yeah.
ago? That's amazing that we have moved far enough at this time that all of us are gobsmacked. But one of the things I think we haven't done, Pat, is we took a kind of a castor oil approach to equal rights, which was, okay, let's hold our nose and swallow this because it's the right thing to do, and we really ought to do it, as opposed to saying, this is good for everybody.
Yeah.
This is good for the entire society. I remember I was going to give a speech on so-called family-friendly policies, which of course was my purview as a woman, to a group of the Fortune 500 CEOs. And I was talking to my father, who was a management consultant, and I said, you know, it's the right thing to do for American families. And I was all filled with righteous indignation. And he said, you're not speaking their language. I said, what do you mean, Daddy? And he said, you need to show them how this is good for the bottom line, how hiring, promoting, and paying women and promoting policies that support families will be better for their bottom line. And that was, in fact, the speech I wound up giving, because it is better for their bottom line. So this apologetic, you know, we really need to do right by women thing is nonsense. Bringing more women on as reporters, editors, and columnists at the New York Times and the LA Times made those better papers for the sake of all of their readers. And that's what we always have to keep in mind. Nobody's doing us a favor here. We're doing all of society a favor by showing up.
Yeah, hear, hear. I want each of you, we'll start with Mary, take about a minute to deliver some advice, not necessarily to women in this room, but to their daughters and to young men, too.
If I had to just take a minute, I would say mentorship. I would say that there is not a woman or a man in this room whose unique skills and experiences couldn't benefit somebody else. So not only should you go out and get a mentor that will help you to be in the right place at the right time and advance your cause, you also should pay it forward. You should look for somebody else that you know could benefit from your experience. Take that experience, go out, help somebody else. One of the most satisfying parts of my life at this stage is mentoring. I truly enjoy mentoring young women, but also even young men who need an opportunity. It's not just women who've been disadvantaged. Anybody from an untraditional background, whether that be economic, racial or social, they also need mentors. And I agree totally with your comment, Anna, that the more we bring to the picture, the more people who are in this process, the better for the economy, the better for our country.
Barbara?
In terms of politics, I think Anna makes the point. She was talking about writing world. It's the same way if you want to have quality representation. Just by definition, you have to have people of every sort, every background, every color, all genders, every way you think of yourself. You need all of those people in all of these legislative bodies because it's a government of, by, and for the people. And how could you possibly have that if you don't have diversity? Last point before she runs me off the stage. I'll never forget when I got to the House of Representatives, 435 people, 23 women in the whole body. And at that time, there were big health initiatives. And the people that were being helped by these initiatives at the NIH were all men, literally, who were average size and weight 150 pounds. And whether it was looking at how aspirin benefited or hurt you or anything else, that's what they did.
Breast cancer.
When we came in, and men do get breast cancer. That was one of the ways we got our way on it. But the bottom line of it is we just said that's inequitable. Women have to be in these clinical trials. So believe it or not, we had to pass legislation. So and we did, and it helped the whole population. No one wants to lose their life, and no husband wants to lose their wife, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
You need diversity, you need equality.
Tani?
Yeah.
I won't take my full minute. I'll just share what I think and also a favorite quote. I think that all of us, we don't want to hand out. We don't want to hand up. We want a fair shake, period. Mm-hmm. And then I want to share with you a quote that I always tell my children, and they're so tired of hearing it, but I say this: strong women, may we know them, may we be them, and may we raise them. Mary Anderson Reese, not my quote.
It's a good one.
Girl. And Anna?
Well, I'll key off of the chief just a little bit. I like to tell younger people that you raise good men and make good men from the ground up. It wasn't so much of a challenge for me to raise a strong daughter, but I was bound and determined to raise two feminist sons. And that was hard because I was asking them to swim upstream against a lot of the prevailing culture. But I kept thinking about two other people out there somewhere I had never met, the people who would someday share their life as their spouses, and also the world in which they could do good if they understood equality. Some years ago, I gave my second son, Christopher, a t-shirt that says on the front, "Dare to use the F word," and then on the back it says feminist.
That's great.
And he came home from college one day and he was wearing that shirt, and I got all aflutter and I said, "Chris, you're wearing the shirt." And he said, "Mom, I wear this shirt all the time." And I said, "You do?" And he said, "Yeah, chicks dig it."
That's so
And I
funny.
thought, feminist men, chicks dig them.
Great. There's the shirt for you. So. I want to thank the panel. My piece of advice would be women have a default of saying sorry, even if somebody steps on your foot. Don't do that. Feminism means never having to say you're sorry. So, all these women will be on other panels throughout the festival. Don't forget to follow women, watch what they're doing in public life, and vote for them. Thanks, everybody.